Alright, hi everyone. So in this video we're basically just going to be making a really simple tip calculator app, just kind of an introductory app to get you used to the nuts and bolts of iOS. So if you go to the Mobile Developers of Berkeley YouTube channel, just type in mods Berkeley to get there, you'll notice that we do have a tip calculator video from a while back. So let's find it here real quick. Tip. Right, so here's the tip calculator tutorial, and you'll notice it's from about 2 or 3 years ago, and this one was actually done using Storyboard. The one we're going to be doing today is using completely a programmatic UI. We'll be touching the Storyboard just a little bit, but this can kind of give you an idea of what we're building and what it's going to look like. So I'm just going to show you this demo right at the end of this video. And that'll kind of give us some direction in terms of what we're building. So if you can see on the screen right now, yeah, so it's basically just a simple tip calculator with 2 screens. Alright, and when you type in a tip, it'll show you the 10, 15, and 20% tips accordingly. Alright, so let's go ahead and build it now. Let's go ahead and do File, New Project, and we'll do a single view application, and we're going to call this Tip Calculator Programmatic. I hope I spelled that right. Non-English major, unfortunately. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and save this. Just save it anywhere you want, and you'll notice that now our project is generated for us. So hopefully you've played around with Xcode a little bit. If not, I'm not going to go too much into that in this video, but just some general stuff. So you'll notice that when you click right here at the top on your project, you'll notice that your project's here and your targets are here. In the General tab, you can adjust the different settings for your app. So let's say I only want to make this a portrait app, so the app doesn't change if you flip your phone to the side. Then I can just deselect landscape left and landscape right. Let's say I only want to make this for iPhone. I can do that. I can set the deployment target, and this minimum deployment target is essentially the lowest version of iOS that this app would work with. You'll also notice there's a bunch of other things, which we'll get into in later videos regarding settings. There's build settings, build phases, info, capabilities, etc. But we won't be needing that for the purposes of this app. So real quick, so the AppDelegate file, we're not going to be touching that too much with this app, but you guys should know it's kind of like, you can kind of think of it like the main, just like the main method is to a Java file, this AppDelegate is to your application. So it has a number of methods that are called right when the app is started, right when the app is closed, and a bunch of times in between. So this is kind of like, I would say, the core of your application. But we don't need to modify that too much for this demo. Then you have a viewController.swift file, and you have a storyboard file. So in case you guys don't know, this is a view controller right here. It's basically a controller with a view in it. So the view that it has by default, which you'll notice right here, it has a view in it. It spans this whole screen. Okay. If you click this top button right here, you'll notice that we have a view controller right in here as the class. That corresponds to the file name right here, or more importantly, actually the class name that you've set right here. Okay, so whenever you add a new view controller, you want to make sure that is set. You'll also notice that there's a number of controls for your view controller. If you set is initial view controller, you can kind of toggle that and see this arrow goes and comes back, right? So if the arrow is there, that makes sure that this is the first view controller that is processed when your application is opened. Okay, won't play around too much with the rest of this, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first thing we're gonna do is go to your viewController.swift file, and I kind of want a background image for this. All right, just to make it look kind of pretty. So what we can do to have a background image is essentially use an image view, which is one of the elements that you'll find down here if you search for it. But remember that we're doing this all programmatically, so instead of dragging and dropping this into the view controller and then linking it via an IB outlet to the viewcontroller.swift file, we're doing it all in the viewcontroller.swift file. So I'll say var background image view is of type UI image view. All right. And right here in my view.load method, which is the first method that's called once the memory for your view controller is allocated, I'm going to set up this image view. So to set it up, basically I need to instantiate the image view, and I can do that by providing it with a frame. Now, what is a frame? A frame is essentially, it defines the x and y starting values and the width and the height of a certain view. Okay? So just to be clear, on your storyboard, if we go and look at this view controller, x0, y0, so the origin is this top left corner. So if you increase the x value of an element, that means it's going to start more towards this side of the screen. If you increase the y value, it's going to start lower on the screen. Okay? I know that's kind of different from math. In math, we go like x and y, 0, bottom left corner is the origin. In this case, it's kind of flipped. Okay? And then the width and height, pretty self-explanatory. Something you guys should probably know at the beginning just is that for iPhone 7s and 8s, not the pluses, just the regular ones, the pixel resolution while programming, it's 375 pixels wide and 667 pixels tall. And you can see that right here once you select the view controller. And these aren't the actual pixels. The actual pixel resolution on your phone is much greater. But to make programming a little easier, that's what it is. Cool, so let's go back. And now let's specify a frame. The way we specify a frame is with the CG_rect data type. I'm going to go down here and it's going to autocomplete for me. So I'm going to choose this option right here where I can fill in CG floats. Alright, so now let's say that the background image view, I wanted to span the whole screen. So one option I could do is set x equal to 0, set y equal to 0, and then set this to UI screen dot main dot bounds dot width, UI screen dot main dot bounds dot height. And there's actually a better way, a cleaner way to do this, but we're going to come back and fix that later. Okay? I just want to show you some of the different ways you can play around with this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say background image view dot image equals UI image. All right, and we'll do named, and now we need an image name to place in there. But here's the issue: we actually haven't chosen an image and imported it into our project. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can go to any kind of stock photo website. Just make sure there's no copyright on these photos. I chose Pexels. It's usually pretty good. And just pick any image that you like from here. I have some ones of dining open. And I'll pick this one right here. Looks kind of good. It's making me kind of hungry, to be honest. So go ahead and open this up in Finder, and I'm gonna just call it tipcalc_bg. Now I'm gonna go into Xcode, click on assets.xcassettes, and I'm gonna drag it in. Okay. So I'm going to drag it in right here, and now you'll notice that it's right here, and it's usable in the project. Now, the 1x, 2x, and 3x, typically you want to provide, the image in different resolutions, just so it doesn't get blurry. So sometimes you want to provide a 3x image size as well. For our purposes, we won't do that, just to keep it simple. One thing I do want you to note, though, is if you go and in Finder, you find your project. So tip calculator programmatic, and you go to this assets.xcassettes folders. You'll notice that now there's a folder for tipcalc_bg.imageset. So just dragging it in here also puts it in your project. Okay. Okay. So now this resource is usable to us. So now I can just type that exact same name in tipcalc_bg, and I can now add it to the view. Okay, so I said that by default each view controller comes with this primary view that spans the whole screen. Okay, how do we reference that? We reference it by self, so self referring to the view controller, dot view, and now we want to add a subview to it because the background image view is going to be inside the view of the view controller. So add subview, background image view, and that'll add it for us. And here's the fun part. In Swift, self is implicitly implied, so you don't actually have to write self to refer to the instance of this view controller. So you can actually get rid of that, and that's the preferred way. That's the cleaner way to do it. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this on iPhone 8 and see what happens. Okay. Cool. Okay, so the image view is showing up for us, but it's kind of stretched. All right. So in order to fix it being stretched, all we need to do is background image view dot content mode equals dot, and then we can kind of choose one of these. Scale aspect fill essentially makes it so that this region that you've specified, this frame, it's going to fill that entire frame. But it's going to essentially crop it for you so that the aspect ratio of the initial image is maintained. On the other hand, scale to fill does not maintain the aspect ratio. Scale aspect fit will essentially make sure that your whole image is displayed, but it might not take up the exact frame specified right here. So the aspect ratio will be there, but not quite what we want. So the one we're going to choose is scale aspect fill. And now if we run that again, all right, we'll know that we'll see that the image is cropped and it fits the screen nicely, and the aspect ratio is maintained. Okay, cool. So now one issue that can happen a lot of times is let's say you specified a frame for this image view, and you've said, okay, so this image view is confined to this frame, but the image of the image view may be larger. So sometimes it kind of sticks out of the frame. Right? You want to make sure that, unless your frame is the full screen like it is right now, you want to be able to crop that image view and not display the rest of it. You only want to display the portion that's within the frame. So one thing that's really useful for that is background image view dot clip to bounds. And if you set that to true, then essentially it'll make sure your image view doesn't go, or your image isn't displayed outside of the frame of the image view. Okay? So that doesn't apply to this scenario, so I'm going to take the line out, but just something useful to note. All right, so next step, this image view is kind of light. All right, so just so that we can read the text on top of it, I want to add an overlay to it. And in order to do that, I can just use the notion of a simple view. So I'm going to call this overlay view, and this is going to be of type UI view. Okay. So right under here, I'm going to do overlay view equals UI view, and I'm going to provide it with a frame. All right, and this frame, I want it to be the whole screen. Now, I showed you one way of having the whole screen be the frame. Another way could be 0, 0, X and Y, so it starts at the top left, right? It starts at the origin. And the frame's width is view.frame.width, and the frame's height is view.frame.height. And remember, this view is referring to the master view of the view controller, the one that spans the full screen. All right. Now, this is a slightly better way to do it, but another thing that we could just do, which is a lot easier, we could just say view.frame, because that's the view built in already spans the whole frame. And that'll give us the same result, okay? So that's what I was talking about earlier, where I said we'd come back and kind of fix it for ourselves. So now that we have this overlay view, we want to give it a background color. So we can just do background color dot black. Okay. Now better practice in Swift, just cleaner code. We don't actually need to specify UI color dot black, although you can if you want. Okay. So now what we want to make sure is we don't want a completely black view put on top of this background image view, because then we can't see the background image. We want to make sure that its opacity is slightly lower so we can still kind of see the background image. To set that, we just set the alpha value. So if we set it to 0.5, then that means it has 50% opacity. If we set it to 1, then it's completely pitch black. Okay? So now we're going to do view.addSubView, background image view. And notice the order we're doing this in. We're first adding the background image view, and then we're adding the overlay view on top. Okay? So this overlay view, you can think of it as it's stacked on top of the background image view, which is stacked on top of the view that comes with the view controller. Oh, oops, my bad. I accidentally added the background image view again. I meant to add the overlay view. Let's see how it looks now. Alright, cool. So I feel like text would be readable on top of this. So let's go ahead and add some text to this, okay? So I'm just going to add one label up here that says tip calculator, and then one button that says go to calculator, okay? And that's going to take us to the next screen. So I'm going to go up here and say var title label is a UI label, okay? And then I'm also going to say var next button, which will take us to the next screen. And excuse my naming here, it's not particularly great. When you actually make apps, you want to name your variables a little better. But okay, so now we're going to say title label equals UI label. We're going to specify a frame for it. And so let's say I want to give it a little bit of margin on the left. I can specify that, hey, okay, so this is going to start 30 pixels from the leftmost side of the screen. The Y, let's say I want it to be, kind of towards the top of the screen, but not too high. So the screen is 667 pixels. So I could specify maybe that this label starts 100 pixels down from the top. Now I can also say that since I want this to be centered, that the margin has to be the same on both sides. So if it's starting at 30 pixels from the left of the screen, then I want 30 pixels on the right. So its width would be the view.frame.width minus 60, because 30 for the left margin, 30 for the right margin. And the height, I can just set it to, let's say, 40, okay? Now I can say title label.textcolor equals .white, so that's visible. Title label.font, you can kind of specify the font you want. You can do system font, which is a default font. If you import other fonts, you can also use those. So I'll just use system font of size, let's say 20. Then we can specify its text, title label.text equals tip calculator. And then we'll do, then we'll go ahead and add it to our view. So view.addSubView title label. Okay, now let's go ahead and set up this next button. Next button equals UI button. And again, we have to specify a frame. Let's put it near the bottom of the screen. And we'll also give this a margin of 30. So let's say view.frame.height minus 150, so close to the bottom of the screen. And width can be view.frame.width minus 60, and height, let's say 50. By default, iOS standards, they say that you want to make a button at least 44 pixels tall. It's kind of arbitrary, but that's kind of like based off of research about thumb size and how big you want a button to be able to be pressed. So we'll make its height 50, so it's easily pressable. All right. Why is this not liking it? Let's see. Oh, oops. I declared this as a UI label. It's supposed to be a UI button. Okay, cool. So Then let's say next button, and I want to set the title on it. I can set it to go to calculator for state.normal. And I can also set the title color, so set title color, and I'll do .white for control state.normal. I can also set the background color, so next button .background color, let's say equals UI color .blue. And I can also let's see how this looks for starters, and then we'll do some more styling on this. Alright, so what do we notice here? We want the tip calculator to be kind of centered. And this button, I think it would be nicer with rounded edges. So let's go ahead and make those changes real quick. First of all, I think this should be kind of bigger. So we'll increase the font size. Then what we can do to center this, the text within the label, is title label dot text alignment equals dot center, and that'll center it for us. And next, to give the button rounded edges, we can do next button dot layer dot corner radius, and let's say I want it to be like basically have like half circles at the edges. You know those kind of buttons that are kind of ovalish towards the end, but they're kind of straight in the middle. Pretty popular in iOS. So basically, to do that, all I need to do is set the corner radius to equal half of the height. So I'll do next button dot frame dot height divided by 2, and you can set it to any value. You can set it to 5 or 10 if you just want a slight curve on it. And then I also need to do this next button dot layer, or sorry, next button dot clip to bounds equals true, and that'll make sure that the background color of the button gets clipped to the bounds of the frame that we've specified with this corner radius. Cool. So yeah, we got a decent looking button there, and I know these are all like system, and we also increased the font and we centered this. And I know all these like system buttons, system colors don't look too great. So you can actually specify your own colors, and the way you do that is UI color, and you can specify the RGB values right here as well as the alpha. We could do that, but for the purposes of this demo, we're not going to. But if you want to do that, just go up online, find a hex color, convert it to RGB, and put it in here. Okay. Cool. So moving on. This screen looks fine. The one issue I have is the code is not very clean. So we're gonna kind of split this up into multiple functions. We're not really making use of this method right here, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then we'll make some functions here. Func setup background, and then func setup overlay, func setup title, and then func setup next button. And then we're just going to take this code, we'll pop it in here, and we'll make sure to call these functions in the same order. So setup background, setup overlay, setup title, and setup next button. Cool. Alright, that looks slightly cleaner. So next thing we want to do is we want to go to our storyboard, and we want to drag in another view controller, and this is the view controller that you're going to be taken to on the next screen. So there's a number of ways to present a view controller, and we'll get into more of this later. Essentially, you can use a navigation controller. You can show do a show segue, or you can present something modally. For the purposes of this demo, we're not going to get into that, but we are going to segue to this other screen. The caveat is we're not going to have a segue back. All right, at least for now. So now that we've dragged in this other view controller, we also want to make another view controller file. So we'll call this file main view controller, because this is where most of our functionality is going. You can name it anything you want, really. Naming it main view controller is not any kind of convention. And oops, I did not make it as the right kind of file. So let's remove that real quick, and let's go to new file. We want a Cocoa touch class. Right here we'll specify it's a subclass of UI view controller, and here we'll call it main view controller and go ahead and create it. Cool. So we've made a main view controller class, and you notice if we do it that way, then it kind of gives us all these stubs that we want. Now if we go to the storyboard, we can click on this and we can specify the class, so main view controller. Now we can make a segue. What a segue does is it essentially takes you from one view controller to the next. So click on this yellow top part of the first view controller, hold Control, and then drag it over, okay? And we're going to just do a show segue right now. Alright, so now we're going to give this segue an identifier so we can know when to trigger it. And we'll just call it toMainVC, okay? So now we want to make sure that we're taken to that view controller when this button is tapped. How do we do that? Really straightforward, actually. Just do next button.add target, self action. So we're going to specify a selector here, which basically is going to call a function. We'll pop that in later. And for the event, touch up inside, which is just a basic tap of the button. Okay. And we're going to call this func next button tapped. Okay, and we want this function to essentially be called when this button is tapped. So in here we'll specify next button tapped. And this basically means that when this button is tapped, then this next button tap function is called. Cool. So, and we got a quick fix right here, so let's make it. More on this later, but for now we'll add it in. Okay, so now that we have next button tapped written here, we want to segue. We want to make sure that when this function is called, we segue to the next view controller, right? So in order to do that, all we do is we call this function perform segue. We specify the identifier. Remember, in view controller, in the view controller in the main storyboard, we specified the identifier for this segue as toMainVC. So that's what we're going to specify here. Oops. toMainVC, and the sender is going to be self. All right, let's give it a try and see if it works. All right, I tap this button, and boom, we're taken to the next view controller. Cool. So now we actually want to make the next view controller, right? We want to put some functionality onto it. So in order to do that, we'll go to this main view controller.swift file. And for now, I know that the old demo had 3 text fields in it, or sorry, three labels. To keep it simple and clean, we're just going to have one, and we're just going to calculate the 10% tip. So we're basically just going to have a text field at the top where you enter the amount. We're going to have a calculate button, and then we're going to have a label right in the middle, which just gives you the 10% tip. Okay, so we're not going to have all of these 6 labels. We're just going to have one in the middle that's going to tell you the tip. So in order to do that, first of all, none of this code is useful to me, so I'm going to get rid of it. So what do we want? We want basically a text field at the top and a button below it. So we'll do var amount text field is a UI text field. We'll do var calculate button which is a UI button, and then we want a label kind of in the middle, so we're going to say var tip label, UI label. Okay? So now let's go ahead and do this. Amount text field equals UI text field. We'll give it a frame. Let's say that let's say it also starts 30 from the left, 100 down, width view.frame.width minus 60, same margin on both sides. We'll give it a height of 45. Amount text field, we can also specify things like the styling for it. So so we can, for example, give it a background color if we want. We can specify a border style. Let's say for the border style we do rounded rect for now. You can kind of explore what each of those different styles do on your own. Amount text field, we can also give it a placeholder. We'll say enter the amount of your, or we'll just keep it simple. We'll say please enter an amount. Okay. So we can also do amount text field dot font and specify which font we want. So feel free to do that on your own time. But now let's go ahead and add this to our view. View.add subview amount text field. Let's go ahead and add a button right below it. So now if we want this button to be right below this text field, what we can do is amount text field dot frame dot max y. This means the lowest point in the view. So if we're looking at this old demo, this would be basically this point right here, this bottom line. That's the max y, okay? And then we can kind of add to it. And we'll say that this calculate buttons, y is going to start, so this is going to start 15 pixels after the max y of this text field, okay? And the width, we'll do view.frame.width minus 60. Height, we'll give it like 50, okay? So calculate button, and we're going to style it similarly to the button on the first page. So background color equals blue. We'll also give it a corner radius. And we'll clip it to bounds. We'll give it a title. Calculate tip. Control state.normal. And we'll also set the title color to white. And we'll do view.add subview calculate button. And we also want to make sure that when the button is tapped, we have a function here that's called func calculate tip button tapped. So we'll do calculate button dot add target, same thing as before. Selector calculate tip button tapped. Event dot touch up inside, just a simple tap. And it's going to ask me to add an Objective-C tag here. Okay. Now that we have this, we'll get to the implementation of this in just a bit. Let's finish up by setting up our tip label. So we'll say tip label equals UI label. We'll specify a frame for it. Let's say that I also want the same margin, but I want this to start at the middle of the screen, so I can just do view.frame.height divided by 2. So it'll start halfway through the screen. And I'll give it a height of 45 as well. And I'll make sure to set the alignment to center. And then I'll go ahead and add it to our view. Okay. And before we write this last function, let's go ahead and organize our code a little bit. So var setup text field. Func setup calculate button. Func setup tip label. and we'll call them right here. Setup text field, setup calculate button, setup tip label. Alright, so before writing this method, let's just make sure everything is showing on the screen, looks the way we want it to. So we press tip calculate, or go to calculator, and we get an error. So let's figure this out. So it says terminating with uncaught exception of type NS exception. If we scroll to the very top of this error message, it'll give us a reason. And it says reason can't add self as subview. So we clearly made a mistake somewhere. That's because right here I meant to say tip label, and I accidentally added view to itself. So it didn't like that. Cool, we go to the next screen. Alright, we'll see that this is showing up. The label down here isn't showing up because it doesn't have any text in it right now. But let's go ahead and write this last function, and then it should have some text in it. Alright, so once the calculate tip button is tapped, what do we want to do? We want to basically take the amount text field, and we want to get the amount from it. So let's say amount equals amount text field dot text, and this is an optional string, so it may or may not exist. For right now, we're going to force unwrap it, and this is a string, right? So we're going to try and make a double out of it instead. And this is also going to be an optional type because some strings you can't make doubles out of. So this could have a value or it could be no. We'll force unwrap it for now. So what that means basically is if you enter a random letter like X and you can't make a double out of it, the app's going to crash. So keep that in mind, all right? Okay, so now that we have this amount, let's say let tip equal amount times, we can say 0.1, so that's 10%, and then we basically have to set the amount, the tip label's text equal to this tip. So tip label.text equals, we'll put a $sign, and then we'll use string interpolation to put the tip right there, okay? So this will basically take the value of the tip and format it as a string for us. Alright, let's give it a try. Alright, and we'll notice, so here we've built a basic tip calculator. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to change this a little bit and show what the benefit of adding a navigation controller can be. We're not going to dive into it too much, but in case you guys need this for your projects, I want to make sure that you have this knowledge. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this, I'm going to go to the storyboard. I'm going to drag in a navigation controller. Okay, you'll notice it drags in two controllers like this. I will delete the second one. I'll take the first one right here. I'm going to make this the initial view controller now, so this is what the app opens to originally. I'm going to control drag to this first view controller and set it as the root view controller. Okay, a navigation controller essentially helps us manage our navigation stack. When you're presenting these different view controllers, you can think of it as one is getting put on top of another in navigation stack, and sometimes you want to navigate back and forth between view controllers in your stack. Okay, so let's see what happens now if we run our tip calculator. Let's see what the differences are. You'll already notice that in the storyboard right here, you'll see a nav bar at the top. Okay, so what's happened here is, yes, there's a nav bar at the top right here. So that doesn't look good. We don't really want it. But here's the benefit. Now we can kind of go back and forth because there's a nav bar at the top. It's better practice to use a navigation controller to put a nav bar there than it is to just drag in a navigation bar. So be wary of that. I encourage you to use navigation controllers. If you don't want the navigation bar to show, you can simply hide it. And we'll do that real quick just to make the first screen look pretty. So we'll go to view controller, and right over here in view did load, we can kind of change that. So we'll do navigation controller, dot is navigation bar hidden, and we'll set it to true. And let's see what happens just now, okay? So now we'll see that it's hidden, okay? And you can access, so this is just one property. If you want to access other properties of a navigation controller, I know that you may not know what delegates are just yet, but essentially adding UI navigation controller delegate can help you do that. Now, but there's one issue now. Now on this screen, we'll see that the navigation bar isn't there and we can't go back. So kind of defeats the purpose, right? Well, all we have to do is we can just go to the main view controller and we can say is hidden is actually false. So the navigation bar is not hidden on that screen. All right, cool. So now what you'll notice though is that when we come back, the navigation bar is showing again, and that's because view.load is not being called over and over again. So here's a fun thing that you guys should probably note. Okay, there are more methods than view.load, and this is getting into certain things such as life cycle of a view controller. But view.load is essentially called when the memory is loaded for the view controller. What if I want something to be called right before a view is shown each time? So if this view controller is shown once, then you navigate away from it and you come back. If I want something to be called over and over, I can use this method called WillAppear, and that's a method provided to you by default. You just override it. Okay. So now you'll notice we've kind of solved this issue. So we go to calculator. All right. So the navigation bar is showing here. We go back. Oops, we're supposed to set this to true. Actually, my bad completely. Navigation, I'm in the wrong view controller right now. This is the main view controller. In the view controller right here, we can basically write this view WillAppear method. And this basically means that every time this view appears, then at that point, we'll make sure to hide the navigation bar. And now you'll notice this issue is kind of solved, right? So that was just a very brief intro to a potpourri of intro concepts. I hope you learned a lot from this tip calculator video. We will dive more into these concepts such as navigation stacks, view controller lifecycle, view lifecycle, and programmatic UI in the future. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and please comment with any questions.